I can do that.
Okay,
Awesome.
perfect.
Perfect. Great.
And going ahead, how do you define smart cities infrastructure? This is a very important point for us.
Absolutely. I think there are many ways to look at the smart city infrastructure. So essentially the goal is not mimic whatever is the existing infrastructure, but to see what is the goal, right? So if the goal initially, because smart city is a huge initiative. So if your goal initially is to create sustainable city or sustainable living spaces, then your focus could be on building sustainable buildings using Internet of Things to build sustainable buildings where you can control the energy. So infrastructure is the foundation, but you have to start with the vision, not implementing a smart city just because there is technology available, but start with your strategic vision and then your foundation of infrastructure, which basically are three components. First is the crux of any smart city basically starts with sensors. So you have sensors and you have 5G nowadays that we can talk about, because when you have sensors, you want to make sure you have network connectivity throughout and with low latency, as well as increased accessibility and scalability. So 5G offers all that. So when you think about infrastructure, think in terms of your use cases, number one. Number two is what is that step-by-step process. The first one is the sensors that are required. The second one is, depending on your use case, your infrastructure can be different apart from sensors. So for example, one of the smart cities I'm engaged with is Stafford County here in Virginia, and there they're using drone technologies that the police is using for public safety. So the infrastructure that's required for drones is very different than from the infrastructure that's required by, say, a sustainable building. So your infrastructure needs would depend on the use cases, but at a minimum, you need to have good higher bandwidth. So think about enabling a 5G connectivity and work with vendors in the ecosystem. Then depending on the use case, your infrastructure can depend on certain specific technologies, whether it's AI or machine learning or drone systems and so on and so forth.
That is impressive how fast we are developing everything right now, right, Ingrid? Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would concur with Swati. Actually, I saw a recent statistic where South Korea already has more than 50 something percent of their population using 5G. So it's definitely
Mhm,
here. It's not
yes.
just in the news. And I would maybe add that the new kids on the block, in addition to the foundational technologies that Swati mentioned, might be also immersive reality. So AR, VR are gaining quite a lot of traction. I've seen it in the video gaming industry, definitely in the entertainment industry, even in
Yes,
fashion, they're starting to promote it heavily. So I
for
think
sure.
we're gonna see probably, I'm watching that closely. The other one that I've been very vocal about is quantum. I think if we manage to overcome some of the challenges that we have noticed in the material sciences world, but innovation is pushing really hard. So if they can actually overcome that and have quantum as a service, then I think we're going towards optimization of smart city infrastructure. So I would say what Swati mentioned are definitely the key foundational elements. But then if
Yeah.
we have quantum or satellite powered internet, which I really wish I had yesterday when my internet got disconnected during a live
Yeah.
event, then I think
Yes.
that's going to be that next generation of smart cities, right?
Yes.
How do we get to the next gear, so to speak?
Yeah, and good that you mentioned fashion because my background is in fashion and it still is developing. Still fashion, we have some companies as LVMH that is very ahead on the part of technology, but others still need to develop many things. Good that you mentioned that. And
So
what
I
about,
wanted to add one point regarding the
yeah,
VR AR. So the Stafford County here in Virginia have an interesting use case of VR AR. So Stafford County has a lot of history. They have like participation in the civil rights. past presidents, including Abraham Lincoln, have visited. So what they're using VR/AR is actually encourage visitors for downtown Stafford. So I thought that was an interesting use case,
Yes,
using
for sure. Good
augmented and
point.
virtual reality to increase tourism of a city.
And one
Good
more
point.
comment, we have someone from our audience, Lucia, mentioning that healthcare is a big one. And yes, I've been
Ah,
watching
yeah,
that very carefully. Definitely from a smart city perspective, we're still at the infrastructure conversation, but you can think about health, right? Education, public spaces, mobility, everything that is infused in our work environment as well, living environment, all those
Right.
elements that are usually included in a smart city index. So I encourage everybody, if you're interested, there is a wonderful smart city index. It's just recently
yeah,
published for 2020. And it's nice to see what matters to all humans across the world, regardless of cultural background and regardless of geography. We
yes,
all seem to care about similar things. So
yes,
Right.
for
And with
sure.
the emphasis on climate control, how do we create sustainable living environments?
yeah.
Yes, for sure. What are some strategical considerations that business leaders need to have in mind when designing and planning these cities?
So
Swatchy.
yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question because too often the focus is so much on the technology. But I would start with the vision as to why are you implementing the smart city, not just because the technology exists, but how do we improve the lives of citizens? And so I think of establishing that ecosystem. So the ecosystem should involve community leaders, citizens' feedback, as well as infrastructure partners. So I know Stafford County here, I keep telling that as an example because I'm closely involved. They are involved with Verizon to establish the 5G, but they're involved with an IoT implementation partner. So it's an ecosystem because you need the community leadership support because it is impacting communities. They are the end users, and we talk about human centric design all the time. So start with the vision. What are you increasing the living and working communities? What are you providing for them? That vision should be clear. And how do you achieve that, right? So in this case, it can be you establish your vision, then you build your ecosystem, which is infrastructure vendor partners, implementation partners, as well as businesses. So the community is not just citizens living in the area, but they might be small businesses, they might be large businesses. Get feedback from them. And then finally, the local government authorities, like in Stafford County, the police is using drones, and there are specific use cases in
Yeah,
order not to violate the privacy of citizens. How can you
yeah,
safely employ drones to not violate citizens? So that's a use case. So think of the bigger picture and then go into the implementation steps. And obviously, keep it in the back of the mind. How can you start with a pilot to achieve small successes before you can scale up the
you're going to
project?
scale up. Ingrid, anything to add?
Yeah, I sometimes like to mention when we talk about smart cities, I've realized that people forget you hire the best experts for smart cities, but then the integration with the rest of the strategic enterprise goals is very important too. So whatever that institution, if it's government or private, is that drives the smart city deployment, they really need to be aware of the need for harmonization with everything else that's going on. Otherwise, you have chaos. That's one. Two, I would say applying principles of design thinking is also crucial. We're talking about smart cities to improve quality of life of citizens. If you do not involve all the stakeholders before you do the plans, not once you already have everything ready and you just get feedback, that's too late. So truly following the foundational principles of design thinking when developing smart cities is important in my opinion. And last but not least, I would say if organizations or governments try to deploy smart cities and follow legacy structure in terms of budgeting and human resources and talent development, it's not going to work either.
Yeah,
So I
yes,
think keeping
exactly.
that in mind, that to function more in an agile manner, like almost like a startup, the way they have to plan, I think it yields higher success because like we've shared, the technology advances so fast. If you follow traditional methods, even if it's super sound planning that used to be considered state of the art, but it does not fit this dynamic environment, unfortunately, I don't think it's gonna work. That's just my opinion. But
And Ingrid, you touch a good point because about HR, I'm sure that the HR area needs to reshape everything because the way today that HR recruits, I have the background of HR that they have 1, 2, 3 months to recruit is impossible. So I think HR will be, all areas will be impacted, but for sure that they will need to think a different way to recruit for that. So you made me think about that. So how about the ethics elements about smart cities? What do you think? Some ethical things are important, some ethical concerns.
Absolutely. I think the biggest ethical concern when it comes to smart cities, the privacy of citizens. So you can see while drones have been used by police to capture perpetrators, there have been questions asked by the citizens. And obviously, what is the balance between privacy of citizen data to actually using drones for public safety? The balance is increased transparency. So when it comes to smart cities, the biggest question is data privacy, and not just smart cities. Today, literally, we read in the news, all the content and social media platforms have been questioned about
Mm-hmm.
data privacy and data protection and data ethics. So there's a whole conversation that needs to happen. Going back to Ingrid's point, it's not after you implement it you go back and tell the citizens and community leaders that this has been implemented, but engage them throughout the process in a human centric manner and be transparent about what type of data are you collecting, what are you storing, how long are you going to store, right? So and open it to the public. Nowadays all the public are on next door, have the town hall, invite the public to give those inputs and see. So data privacy is the biggest when it comes to um, smart cities, because we are talking about sensors and cameras all over the living and also working spaces. So you want to understand when you're going into a building, what sort of personal data are they collecting about you and how are they storing, how are they using it.
Yes. Yeah, the
That's the
privacy is
biggest. And the second biggest one I would say is the again, going back to protected classes, are you using any algorithmic decision making tools? We are talking about AI and biases all the time. Again, if you're using something like smart parking or smart something else, you want to make sure all the zip codes are equally distributed and not depending on some output from an algorithmic determination, because you don't know what the data has. It might perpetuate existing historical data's biases. So those are the two biggies when I think of how can we distribute the smart city and enable the smart city. When you think about living conditions, are all citizens being served equally? That's the
Mm-hmm.
question.
Yeah, Ingrid.
well, as you know, I'm like super passionate about ethics. I also
Mm-hmm.
serve as the Government Blockchain Association's chief ethics officer. And this morning, actually, I saw a great announcement that an ethics institute is recommending actually creating a new job description for AI, an AI ethics officer. So I think if
Mhm.
we follow that path, maybe we should have a smart city ethics officer, because I do
Yes,
believe that there's so
that would be
many.
great.
That was just an ad hoc comment, but what I had meant to originally mention is that there are many of the ethical principles besides privacy, which is now in the media and is attracting everybody's attention, but also autonomy, I think, is important too. Trust, transparency, and if we're going to live in a smart city, I do believe we need to keep a very delicate balance between how much is smart and how much does it start to interfere with the way you live, the way you
Yeah,
work, the way you feel comfortable, right?
totally.
Where are the boundaries? And as we've seen, unfortunately, in a digital economy, in a hyper connected world, these boundaries become very blurry. So I do believe that also the principle of autonomy, which is a foundational element in ethics, And that leads to the digital identity, right? Do I have a right to just, if I don't want to be in the smart city visible, turn myself off so my digital identity is
Yeah.
not
And,
visible? I mean, I want a
yeah.
remote control, right, to take me off the
Yeah.
grid or put me on the grid. And, you know, I'm joking a little bit, but I think it's important to think about self-sovereignty, right? And will we have then a smart city digital identity for our financial needs? Will we have one for our healthcare needs? Will we have one for our shopping needs where we all like it, right? Will we have a digital identity for our entertainment needs where everybody feels very comfortable putting all their information, right? For your Netflix, for your movie, any kind of entertainment needs, people feel
Yeah.
much more comfortable, right? Although it's the
Yeah.
same violation of privacy, but it's all a trust and perception,
Yes.
right?
And
So go ahead.
you touch a good point. For example, even if you think that I'm in the Golden Gate Bridge, I am at the beach house, and here many people are here like they don't want to be in the city. So many people, I think, because they don't want to be in the city right now with COVID. So I think the smart cities will raise some things about where do you want to be,
Yes,
really.
absolutely.
So, continue. As we are talking about smart cities, can you please elaborate about the key elements that a smart city must have?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest key element, as the title of this presentation or the discussion, is how to build inclusive smart cities. And we have touched upon the digital divide that is happening currently, right? And COVID has only exacerbated the digital divide. So there are multiple key elements. To bridge that gap so that we build inclusive smart cities, inclusive smart communities. So, first is, I would say, design with diversity in mind. So, the diversity, there are published frameworks with diversity design frameworks and so on. But one of the important things when it comes to physical play spaces is for the disabled, for example. So we do have the American Disabled Act. So you want to follow those principles for following the guidelines, but keep them at the back of your mind if you're actually enabling smart sensors for example, for smart parking and other utilities. So number one, that would be, you know, design with diversity at the back of your mind, and that includes a variety of personas, if I may. So that includes disabled people, that includes various cultural folks from coming from different ethnicities, and so on and so forth. Number two is just make sure that you're getting the feedback throughout the implementation process to build this inclusive city. So, for example, some cities, or nowadays we notice there is a trend since COVID, people are moving from cities into suburbs and even some rural areas and increasing the prices in those areas. So you want to make sure that whoever used to live over there, and there is a term that is used sometimes called gentrification or what have you, right? So you want to make sure that the citizens who are actually currently residing those spaces have a voice. And secondly, you also have to educate about the digital systems, right? Not everybody in all zip codes understand what a digital identity is. They don't even understand what sort of privacy details they're giving up. So you want to actually become that champion of educating them to say, this is what smart city means to you, and this is the impact that it will have on you. So if you're walking down a downtown mall at 12 in the night, maybe the cameras are capturing what all you do. So making sure that you provide that education to all the zip codes as possible, to all the protected classes as possible. So you want to ensure that inclusive smart cities, and we have already emphasized data transparency, because what is that data? Okay, you collected my image at 12 in the night, but are you passing it on to third parties like police or law enforcement for no particular reason? So, but are you communicating that is the question. So
Very
those are
good
some
point.
things necessary to build the inclusive smart cities.
Thank you for bringing it up, Ingrid.
Yeah, that was already a super comprehensive answer, but I might just
Yes.
maybe add a few points here and there. I think Swati already mentioned, right? We want to touch on disability, to be mindful about that, gender, different other socio-demographics such as elderly and children, right? A smart city has to be also fit for children. We're not very good at that these days. We're just thinking about everybody else, but they are the
Yeah.
future citizens of the world. So if we really want to build smart cities, there should be a childhood proof and childhood smart city as well.
Yeah.
And there's no category like that, actually, to be fair,
Yeah.
yet. And then I
Uh,
think the only other thing that, again, we touched a little bit, but the financial divide, and I think Swati already mentioned education. So the digital divide, we need to be careful because all these, although you can pay attention to them to make sure you include them in an inclusive smart city design, but you have to be careful because you can also turn it very easily into bias if you're not careful to hire the right teams, like we talked just a few minutes ago. So in that ethical design, it has to be that the ethics team helps smart city development to ensure that when you're trying to be inclusive, you're not actually causing another bias without wanting to, because you're trying to help just one set or subset of the population that you wish to be inclusive with. But it's very easy to fall in a slippery slope and discriminate others out of a wish to be inclusive. So I sometimes point that out because I've seen it happen. And then the only other thing, and I think Swati is the great example that we'll share later, right? That you are engaged with, is the community versus the citizen. So when we design smart cities, the way I think about it is almost like Venn diagrams. What's good for each citizen? What's good for the immediate community of that citizen? And then what do we need to do at a global level? So that's the only other part I would say we need to be careful, because sometimes what a citizen wants is not what your immediate community wants. And although both might want good things, but and then what is good for us as a global society, right? So if we talk about global smart city development, what are some of the characteristics we need to be careful there?
mhm.
And there
Yes.
it becomes a little bit more complicated with what we all hate, like regulatory frameworks, right? And Swati's a great advocate of working on playbooks and framework development, and it's super important. And yes, we're never done, and that's the challenge with frameworks. But I think for smart cities, we really have to follow the what was started already, the journey that World Economic Forum and OECD have recently published major reports. So they're
Mhm.
several pages long, where they're highlighting that we need global regulatory frameworks, tax clarifications, legal liability clarifications. If we don't take care of all of that, we're not going to be able to build inclusive cities, and certainly end up in a lot of trouble, because if you try to do good and all these other elements are not clarified from a regulatory, legal, and financial perspective, it becomes impossible to manage. So that's all what I wanted
Yeah.
to add.
Very good.
You said an interesting point that got me thinking, is that you said the what the community wants and citizen wants sometimes can be like it's difficult to merge them together. So I was listening to a podcast called Nice White Parents. It's listed by the Time magazine as number one in their top 10 podcasts. And basically the first episode that I just listened this morning was interesting. The citizens want to advocate diversity in schools, but as a community, they actually leave one school and go to a different school. So the citizen might think something, but when it comes to take action, they might do something different. And it takes like
Yeah.
community leaders to bring everybody together to go in a certain direction. And I think the word they're giving them is integrators, but
Mm-hmm.
that's an excellent point. It's a very tough decision for regulatory authorities. Like, for example, the Stafford County initiative is by the government. The CTO is involved, and the grant and the funding is coming from the Commonwealth of the state of Virginia. So
Yeah.
the government, but how can they make sure the citizen voices are heard through their community leaders? Not an easy problem to solve.
And just to finish and to open for questions, any business case that you would like to share with the audience?
Sure. So there are a couple of business cases I already touched upon: drones for public safety, sustainable building, smart parking, and so on. The one use case I did not touch upon is the climate something related to sustainable environment and climate change. And again, what I'm realizing, as I was one of the mentors in the innovation program called the Opportunity Project, led by the EPA here, as well as in my own community or Fairfax County where I reside, it's finding where good recycling facilities is like a like it's very difficult. They made it very difficult. Like I have to drive literally 2 miles to drop all the recyclables. That's how they implemented, right? So how can the smart cities enable the climate change? Of course, sensors can detect the carbon dioxide levels, they can send notification and alerts, but also again it touches upon citizens civic sense as well. So there's a lot of collaboration, non-technology components that can make the smart city use cases successful. And the only way you can do is bridge that gap by bringing the community leaders together and have that conversation while you're implementing the technology. I think the technology is the easy part. Making sure that you connect the dots between all the components in the ecosystem is the toughest, but there are several use
Yeah,
cases.
very good point. Ingrid?
Yeah, this is hard because I have so many. I have to pick which ones I want to mention
Pick
today.
the
But
best one that you think.
well, not best is a relative term, but the one that's near and dear to
Yes.
my heart that I care a lot
Yeah.
about is
Fashion.
digital identity. And it's because I read just a few years ago the statistics that 50 million children in the world do not even officially exist. They do not
Oh,
exist. They don't have an identity. Okay.
yes.
So
Yeah.
talking about smart cities and for the future, not to mention how many adults don't have an identity, but we're talking about children, 50 million of them, and that's only what's reported that don't have a digital identity. So I would say if we start to talk about seriously developing and designing and deploying smart cities around the world, we have to make sure that we actually provide a digital identity to these children from birth, because otherwise everything else beautiful we are going to build is not going to work or be sustainable for the future, even if it's designed to be inclusive. So I think that's one that's super important, and I consider it actually ethically also one key element. I mean, what kind of smart city in the inclusive are we building if we're completely disregarding that some children don't exist? So that's number
Yes.
one. The second one, if I put my uh, 15, 20 years worth of professional experience on, is healthcare. I do believe that this pandemic has also highlighted that as a global society, we can do so much better to develop a global healthcare ecosystem that's actually more functional than what we have right now. And that would be truly smart. So I had the opportunity a few months ago with a great team to develop the hospital of the future, how it would look like, and to really, because it was just
Yes. Very
concept,
good point.
right? It's easy when it's concept. Making it happen in real life is a little harder due to the cost. But there are great giant technology companies with healthcare experience as well, such as Siemens and Philips, that are working on that. And they already have the OR of the future. That is exactly what we're talking about. Everything is touchless. Everything is full of sensors, full integration between all the technologies we currently have available. So I hope, that's my Christmas wish list, so to speak, for the next few years, that we can have in the smart cities also smart healthcare ecosystems. And when I say that, it can't just be one hospital, because then you can't be inclusive by definition, right? So that's why I use the word small healthcare ecosystems. So
Yeah.
those are the two that I would mention today. Of course, there are endless use cases, but if I had to pick the two that are the
No,
nearest and
this is
dearest to my
perfect. We are talking about healthcare at this point, and you brought a very good point. As we have still have some minutes, first of all, I would like to thank you both for this incredible webinar, and I would like to open for questions for the audience. We already had some questions in our chat. Did you answer everything, Ingrid
Yeah,
and
we just
Swati?
did, we addressed them already, but
Okay.
if
Anything else the audience would like to add? If not, I would like to ask everybody to be in our page to see our articles in Women in Artificial Intelligence, and to reinforce that today series will be in our page. I don't know if Swatchi or Ingrid, do you want to add something else?
No,
Connie, you
I
can
just
make
want to
it.
add, so
Oh,
for those of you, I know Lucia, who provided good inputs, had to step off, but we would be posting the YouTube video on LinkedIn and other
great.
social media channels. So feel free
Yes.
to also distribute to your friends, and please engage in this ongoing conversation.
Yes. And great. Everything.
Likewise,
Anything
just to
else?
encourage everybody
Okay.
to join our Women in AI group. It's a great group.
Yes.
It's been growing exponentially, I would say.
Good. Yeah,
It
we're
is.
very
Thank you
pleased with that.
for the
Yeah,
opportunity.
so I would like to thank you both for inviting me to moderate and thank you, the audience, for the time. So I wish you a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.